So welcome back, everybody. I hope you managed to get a quick refreshment as well as some networking opportunities and to see some of the exhibitions. It's my great pleasure to welcome, we've got two presentations now, but first of all, we've got Dr. Peter Gruber. So we're going to be exploring in the first session, online examinations and testing. So we're joined by Dr. Peter Gruber from the Università della Svizzera, Italiana, and his presentation, Establishing a Culture of Error Through Digital Exam Inspections. Shortly after that, or immediately after that, will be followed by Imperial College Business School's Digital Assessment Journey with Emma Stokes and Anik Varley. And then we'll be taking attendee questions for the panel. So please, as usual, please use the Q&A tab throughout the session. Just a quick reminder that if you were looking for the role of the library in the age of online education, scroll to the top of the agenda and click track 2. But for now, over to you, Dr. Peter Gruber.
Thank you for having me here. You have it a little bit upside down in the sense that I will be talking about something that you do after you have already done a digital exam. And it's one of these things, one of these opportunities that came by through the pandemic that would not have been possible before. And it will surprise you how big the effects are of such a small measure. So what are we talking about? Very simple. The question that I would like to ask you is, how often do we really learn from our mistakes, and how often is this just a kind of flat platitude? And even if we sometimes learn from our mistakes, can we teach our students how to learn from their mistakes? And this is an example of how this can be done with, I would say, tremendous success. The setup is the following. I'm teaching together with the colleagues an introductory statistics class. For economic students, we have about 140 students, and there is the main exam, the so-called spring exam, and this is at the end of the semester, so it's about in mid-June, and it has a failure rate of about 22%, which I think for a statistics exam anyway is not that bad. And students have the opportunity to retake the exam after the summer, so about 3 months later, and this is called the summer exam. Until 2019, we had a paper exam, classical exam written, so calculate something, maybe recognize a concept, interpret the result, and also already on paper provide some commands of the R programming language. In 2020, we, of course, like everybody else, had to move to a digital exam style, and the digital exam style is done in our learning platform. It's a quiz in the Moodle learning platform, and what I'm telling you can be implemented in any other basically digital learning or digital exam format. So this is nothing that is very specific to the learning platform that we have been using. Pretty much similar question types, calculate something, recognize something, interpret something, just that now the entry format is multiple choice plus a few open questions. And just to alleviate any feedback on that side, the format and the question types have been known to the students in a mock exam. So it was, of course, new for them, but it was not so new for them. So they had some prior warning that this exam format is different. So this is how such an exam looks like. It's in Italian, but basically you're asked about the uniform distribution. You have to calculate something, and then here you can XXX give the correct answers, one or more correct answers. Or here, this is an open exam question, pretty much the same. So here you're required to provide the R command again for calculating a probability in the uniform distribution. So what did we do? And I'm talking now after the exam is done about the exam inspection. At our university, students have the right to inspect any exam. Usually this so far has been mostly done for students who were failing or who were close to failing in order to get material for appealing the grade. This was until 2019 the case. There was a physical exam inspection. It was, of course, during the holiday period because exams are at the end of the semester. And about 2 to 3 students made use of this offer, so less than 3%. And compare this to the failure rate of 22%. So this means not even all the failed, a vast minority of the failed students even bothered to look at their exams to learn from their mistakes. So come in the digital exam inspection. That is a very, very simple thing. You just tell your learning platform that after the quiz is done, to reopen the quiz, of course, in read-only mode so that nothing can be changed. And what we have been choosing to do is very simple. We show the student's answer. So if it's wrong, of course, the wrong answer. We show the correct answer, and we show the points awarded. So we also show whether we have recognized this as a correct answer or not. And we gave students free access within a time frame of 1 week. So we just sent them an email with a link. Here is your quiz. Your exam. You can look at this exam again. You have 1 week time, and we then measured the access, how many students took up this opportunity, simply by looking at the last access. This is one of the things, of course, in all things digital. We have very good log files, and we just basically looked whether the last access date was the date of the exam. Then students did not inspect their exam, or whether the last access date was somewhere in this time frame of 1 week. And then, of course, we said, well, the student had a look at the exam. And the first thing that we notice is the following. So in the offline world, about 2 to 3% took up this opportunity and participated in the exam inspection. And in the online world, it was a staggering 52% of the students who looked at this. So if you just make it a little bit more simple so that students don't have to travel, that they can look at this from home, they take up this opportunity, and that's a more than tenfold increase in participation. If you break it down, you can break it down, and then you see the failing grade students had the highest take-up rate. About 2/3 of the failing grade students took up this opportunity. But even the very good students, so with the best grades, they basically, 40% of them also had a look at their exam. And then for the average grade students, so those who have a passing grade, barely passing grade, a little bit better than barely passing grade, for those the take up was 55%. So I think the first thing that we learned from this is that if you make it easy for students to have a look at their exam and to learn from their mistakes, they will do it. But now the question is this something desirable? Is this something where we would say, okay, this is going to move everybody forward? And this is where I took the data and I found really staggering results. So what you see on the left side are those students who did not participate in the online exam inspection. Remember that they can retake the exam after the holidays, and this is what we call a summer exam. And the gray bar is the average grade of the first trial, and the red bar is the average grade of the second trial for those who did not participate in the online inspection. And basically the grade did not change. Look at this over here. These are the participants. Gray bar, average grade at the average failed grade, of course, at the first trial. And you see these two are pretty much the same. So these seem to be very similar students. But after having looked at their failed exam and then retrying, we see that they basically improved the grade by 3 grade points. And on average, managed to passing grade. Here we have the numbers, and if you're into statistics, this is highly significant. So you could say, yeah, maybe there was some chance, and maybe some kind of good students had a bad day, and then they looked at the exam, and then they had a good result. So the chance that this is a random result is less than 1%. So this is highly statistically significant, and you really have a huge effect for just looking at your exam, learning from your mistake, and then retaking the exam in the summer session. Okay, but this is the number is very small because fortunately not many students failed, and then out of these failed students, some did not immediately retake the exam, so we don't have lots of observations. So the question is, what if you passed the exam? Did you learn something also from your mistake, and did you also improve later on? And fortunately, we could look at this because we can compare the statistics 1 grades to the statistics 2 grades. Statistics 2 is 1 semester later, so it's an exam that takes place 6 months later. And what we saw is that the non-participants, so those students who did not look, remember, about half the students did not look at their exams. The non-participants in the exam inspection, they basically got a worse grade at the second trial. And the participants at the exam inspection got a better grade. And now the question is, how do you define better grade? That's why there are two definitions here. You could say better grade compared to the first trial, or better grade compared to the last available grade. And so you see lots of this improvement is due to students already improving between the first and the second trial, so between the spring and the summer exam. But beyond that, this difference between these two numbers is really the difference between basically learning from your mistakes at the statistics 1 exam and then either improving or not improving at the statistics 2 exam. And here we have quite a good number of students who took both exams. And so this is again highly statistically significant. Here the chance that it's a random result is, well, it's a little bit higher, it's 5%, but it's still a 95% significance level, t-stat of 2.28 or 2.1. And so this is, again, highly significant result that if you look at your statistics 1 exam, you apparently learn something for, well, let's say, maybe not life, but you learn something for your academic career. And you improve your grade at the statistics 2 exam. So what can we conclude? Well, number one, this is a no-cost measure. You just basically put your digital exams in read-only and tell the students, have a look at it. You get a clear measurement because you have this last access variable that probably is available in all the learning measurement systems. So you can measure success. As already said, the participation in these exam inspections increased more than tenfold. And so what we learned first is that students take the opportunity to expect in some exams and to learn from their mistakes if the access is easy. What's the impact? Impact number one, students who participated and retook the exam improved their grade by about 2.87 grade steps. And on a 10 grade scale, a 3 grade improvement, I think, is really, really a very big one. But there seems also to be some meta learning. They even improve by about half a grade step in the next semester. And it seems there is a cultural element to a feedback culture or to a positive error culture that is established. Now, I have to be fair and give some limitations. There are 3 limiting factors that might reduce the results a little bit or the significance of the result a little bit. First of all, of course, this is self-selection. Students self-selected into whether or not they want to inspect the exam. And so it might be that more motivated students have self-selected into looking at the exam. But I would say this is not a very large factor for a very simple reason. If you study for an exam, this is days and days and days. And then you get a bad grade. So maybe you haven't studied that much. And then if you look at your exam, this is just 10 or 15 minutes. It can be done from home. It's not a big effort. So I think the self-selection there is not the biggest problem. One thing that I have to admit is that, of course, what we can't do is we can't distinguish improved learning from improved test-taking skills. So it could be that students actually did not really learn a lot about statistics, but they learned about how to do multiple choice tests. But again, what we see is that this effect is there for not so good students, and it's also there for very good students. So there might be a component to improving test-taking quality, but it might only be a small component. And the last one, and this is definitely something that I have to admit, is my study covers first-year students. And probably the impact is the biggest for the first few exam inspections, because then students get a feedback on their learning style. Maybe they also get a motivation to learn what they did wrong and possibly also why they did it wrong. And they will have some meta learning, but of course, this cannot be perpetuated. So it's not that if you do 10 or 20 exam inspections, that your grades get better by 10 or 20 points on a 10-point scale. That's clearly not the case. But I think especially for first-year students, facilitating these very simple online exam inspections is a measure that costs almost nothing and that can have a really, really big impact on the grades of the students, on their learning strategies, and finally also, I think what is very important on establishing an error culture, that you establish a culture of learning from your mistakes is not just an empty word, but something that is taken on by an institution. That's it. Thanks a lot. And I'm also, I think afterwards is a question session, and I'm looking forward also to comments and questions.
Well, you've already had some questions, you'll be pleased to hear, Peter. So thank you very much for that. That was fascinating. I'm going to hand over now to Emma Stokes and Anik Varley, who are going to talk to us about Imperial College Business School's digital assessment journey. So over to you. Are you going first, Anik? Or is it
I am
Emma?
indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting the school to your event. We're incredibly privileged to be here. So my name is Anik Varley. I'm Head of Exams and Assessment at the Business School, and my colleague who works in my team is Emma Stokes, and is also the project lead for us investigating the possibilities of digital exams. So one of the considerations that the school had been thinking about way before the pandemic had hit was around the fact that we had a global online MBA program, and the idea of having digital exams was very much inbuilt as a possibility, because we were relying heavily on having a paper-based exams, which we were running through different centres at different locations globally. And to be truly online, we needed to find a solution. So back in 2017, we went on a bit of a fact-finding mission and looked at different online digital delivery companies, not just looking at the UK, but having a look at the market as a whole. We, along with the rest of Imperial College, went through a tendering process. And Univise as a product have a neat product called Wiseflow, which is the one that we use, and we selected them as our best case scenario for what met our particular needs. We chose one of our programs that we thought we could pilot the Wiseflow system on. It contains 40 students. The academic director was very much on board. It was our climate change program. So we were looking at a group of students that were already very engaged by nature, and were looking at solving lots of global problems, one of which moving away from paper-based assessments in general. So we went ahead with a pilot in the April of 2017, and we'd had an in-session, in-person training with the students to show them what the software looks like, how to engage with the software. We'd made a decision to sort of make it cheating proof, if you will. The system has a lockdown software that's available for students to use, but we were using our own PC labs. So things like internet connectivity was all in our control. Students were able to log into the system using their usual Imperial College credentials. So we had a certain level of control over this particular pilot. We wanted to glean some feedback from the students, but also from the faculty, and for me personally, from my team in terms of administrating our first digital exam. And what we came to realise is that we, although we had been somewhat flippant in this pilot, it actually needed to be seen as a much bigger project and has some dedicated resources to have a look at how we want to use the system and how best to support the students. Emma, over to you.
So this is where I came in as project lead. So our next move was to expand the use of students bringing their own device onto campus with the lockdown software enabled to take their exams using their own devices. So we looked for some low stakes exams. So we settled on our summer school offering for one of those modules, which had 70 students and was 100% multiple choice, which we knew from experience was pretty self-explanatory for students to use. We had a bit of trouble finding an appropriate venue, so looking for something with power large enough for a number of cohorts, and you'll see a picture of what we ended up doing in a minute. And we had some in-person training and installation of the lockdown browser on campus in late July, and then the exam in August. We had our invigilators from paper exams. Some of those on board were given some basic training, and I was there as well to supervise, along with Univise, who travelled over from Europe to be there and give us some support. In response to the initial pilot Anik mentioned, we monitored the sound levels with a comparable exam in the same venue in the morning that was paper-based, so that we could see if there was a large difference between the two. We also, this was the first time that we'd used the auto marking, so we learned some lessons about how to extract that data and manipulate it. And overall, it was very successful as a pilot. We did have some learnings, such as the impacts of admin rights on student devices, their own language settings, things like that, that we've took forward. Here you can see what the layout looked like. So that black strip along the bottom is so that we could give power to all of our students rather than asking them to get up and move. Even though they were advised to bring fully powered laptops, we were also able to see how many students plugged in, if anyone had to plug in the middle, etc. So moving forward from that, our next steps were to expand Bring Your Own Device to some more higher stakes exams within our MSc cohorts with a wider range of assessment types. So including some MCQ, but also written answer, introducing appendices, which is a way of attaching drawings and formula and things like that to your submission as a student, fill in the blanks, etc. So that was going to be in April 2020, which I'm sure you can preempt didn't go quite to plan. And we were also introducing in-platform marking for the first time. So we were also doing some training of our team and the students and the invigilators in anticipation for this next April exam session. But obviously, COVID happened. And at the time COVID happened, we were actually mid-exam with our finance suite. So they were in progress from the 9th to 20th. And we had a few MCQ tests and multiple choice tests that were due to take place the week after we told our students they could go home. And then also the main spring exam period I was talking about previously coming up about a month later. So the initial things we did were move our finance suite exams onto our VLE platform as a submission platform, just because we didn't have any time to train the students on a new platform at all. They've since been switched over to using Wiseflow, which is the platform that we're using, the online assessment platform. In terms of the MCQ tests, we decided they were 100% MCQ, so we knew that would work quite well on Wiseflow. So we took the decision to have our first remote Wiseflow assessments using those. So over the weekend of the 14th, we trained all those students, which was several hundred, I think, on how to use the platform using some written video and home demo resources. Cancelled the first test, and then the other two went ahead on Wiseflow with our backup of being any problems coming up. We could easily award extra time on the platform, and they went really, really well. I think they were some of the smoothest exams that took place well, since we moved to Wiseflow, I suppose. And then continuing on, looking forward to the main spring exams that we had been training students on previously. As those students had already received training on Wiseflow, we were in a really good position to carry on and use Wiseflow with making a few decisions and taking a few additional actions. So the first decision we made was a couple of our MSc programs that had exams in that platform. They use some really specialist software for coding and things like that. So we kept those guys on the Incendi VLE platform using that submission system that the finance students had used. We determined not to use the lockdown software that we had been intending to use, just because from a student perspective, it's one of the more difficult things to, I suppose, download and make sure it's working. And the students were also now in a global scenario, so we had no control over their Wi-Fi situation, etc. We decided to try and keep the platform as consistent as possible in terms of the options they had and the tools they were using. We, at that time, most of the exams continued to be closed book. So students were, even though we didn't have the lockdown software, we were telling them that they were not allowed to refer to any non-permitted resources and obviously not collude with each other. And to ensure that took place, we were, for the first time, sampling some samples of student exam submissions using our Turnitin software. And it was a college requirement that all departments introduced a remote exam allowance, which was an additional, at the time, 15 to 45 minutes, depending on department choice, that students would have to upload files, check that the files were all the right ones in the right place, etc. And in terms of actions, we introduced some help desk email addresses for students to use to get in touch with us during an exam. We set up a couple of Wiseflow information pages for our students and our faculty, ran some town hall online Q&A sessions with our students to reassure them and answer any questions before the exams. We trained our UG students who hadn't been trained as part of the main bunch, and also produced some marking guidance and some videos for faculty doing marking. Following on from those, obviously some things went very well and some things went less well. So on the good side, our students were very well prepared. There's an instant messaging system within the Wiseflow platform, and that was really helpful and worked really well for any in-exam updates from us in terms of any adjustments to questions, etc. UniWise have a instant chat help desk that's available now in core hours, but almost core hours then. And that was really helpful for assisting on any tech sides if we had any concerns about the platform or about students progressing. Faculty really liked that they didn't have to decipher any handwriting anymore. And overall, they all went very smoothly and it was very successful. In terms of the less positive side, the remote scenario was probably one of the most challenging aspects. So we didn't really have the control that we would normally have of being able to contact our students if they were in a room, have them contact us, etc. The method used for attachments didn't work as well as we'd hoped. The students weren't paying as much attention to where they were attaching things, making sure that they were naming things correctly. We had quite a few student emails post-exam from sort of anxious students asking us to check things, difficulties handing in, etc. Students didn't really use the remote allowance properly, so the intention was that that was just a checking and uploading period of time, but they tended to use that just to continue and then ended up running out of time anyway. Our team had sort of varied levels of experience because some of them hadn't been expecting to be as involved with the platform. And we'd also made some assumptions in how we set up the exams, which had an impact on the marking experience. So we'd put the exams into Wiseflow thinking that this made sense to us, but when it came to markers and the different ways in which they mark their student submissions, it perhaps wasn't ideal for all of them. And then we also had some issues with collusion and plagiarism and the fact that we didn't have any benchmark for this scenario being a remote assessment. So it's just a bit of data about how many exams we conducted on the different platforms for the rest of that academic year. So going from 13 that we planned in April, you can see we'd done quite a few by October. And as of this year, we've completed almost all of our exams on Wiseflow, apart from the 2 programs that I mentioned earlier. And then looking forward and learnings from what we have experienced. I won't go through everything, but on a student point of view, having got some feedback from all the different stakeholders, we are now notifying students of what to expect in terms of how the exam will be set up in Wiseflow ahead of each exam period. We've trained them to reference sources in their exams, and there's also a couple of agreements they have to tick on the front cover page about plagiarism and referencing. And we're now going to be offering them refresher training ahead of the spring exam periods, because it was quite a long time when they're going to the second set of exams from the initial training back in, say, October time, October, November, that we've noticed that they've kind of forget quite a few things before they get there. Faculty, we worked with a number of our faculty and created a faculty working group to help improve our advice on how to write assessments for a remote sitting, how to mark them, how to decide how you want it to be set up and tell us how you want it to be set up. And then from an exam and assessment team point of view, we've got the invigilators trained up now to help us be supported in our online assessments. We are using a new proofreading process, and we've implemented a buddy system, so there's sufficient support amongst the team all the time. And then let's back over to Anik.
Thanks, Emma. So what does the future hold for us and digital exams? From the business school's point of view, our intention was to move to digital exams way back in 2017, and we see that as being part of our future. The big difference I feel for the next academic year certainly is that we'll move more to a bring your own device on campus exams for students, so we'll still be using the digital tools. We want to engage students much earlier, so hopefully before the students start, and also in the induction period, we'll embed the use of digital exams and the WiseFlow product right from the very start. We do need to look into more of an instant one-on-one messenger system. In an ideal world, it would be integrated with WiseFlow, but there are a couple of issues that we're still looking into at the moment in order to make that work. And in terms of our longer term plans, we want to continue to work collaboratively with Uniwise. Emma's also established a user group of other WiseFlow users in UK, not even just London based institutions, and also work closely together with our faculty. So as we get more and more accustomed to writing digital exams, we can be a little bit more elaborate with the tools that we can make use of within WiseFlow. And that's really about where we are, I think, in terms of the future, and hopefully when we all have a version of normality, having this on-campus flavour of our digital exams. Thank you very much for your time. And I think we're going to move over to some questions for the three of us.
Absolutely. So thank you very much. Really, really interesting presentations. And we've already got a number of questions for you as panelists. So I'm going to start with a question that I think is about integrity, and it's really for you, Peter. Are you worried about the integrity of the quiz? Does read-only mode wouldn't prevent students from making a record of the quiz? And I think it's linked with a question from Zakiza, who's asking, was the retake exam the same as the first exam? So I don't know whether you can help with those, Peter.
So the retake exam was, of course, different. And especially the Statistics 2 exam was definitely different than the Statistics 1 exam. And we had a significant effect on this one. And I think that is always the question, should you or should you not publish old exams? And we have the philosophy that we publish old exams for the very simple reason, because otherwise you just give an advantage to the resourceful ones. I think it is completely impossible to keep exams secret. And so you have to invent new exam questions all the time, or new takes on an exam question all the time. And I think it's just fair that you publish old exams, and in this case also that you give access to old exams. And don't forget that we had a mock exam, a test exam before the first exam. So all the students knew the format, they knew the types of questions they could expect. So in that sense, I think there was not a big advantage in having a look at the exam as for kind of mechanically learning. Just I think it's really kind of learning from your mistakes.
Thank you, that's great. And I think the next question is for you, Emma, and Anik. Apart from, it's from Zareen, apart from Turnitin sampling, how did you ensure exams were still closed book?
That's a really interesting question. To ensure an exam is closed book in this environment is really difficult. We had learned some mistakes from our very initial kind of pandemic crisis response, which basically was about us just delivering exams that had already been written and moving it into an online environment. Move on a few months from that, we gave students more advice on how they should reference anything that they're using, because we had some comments from students saying that a lot of them had learned, particularly if it was, you know, from slides, etc. And we have to accept that that's something that students, a mode of them revising and then would, you know, writing exams. But we focus quite heavily on the style and the advice of the faculty writing questions to try to be more innovative and more challenging. So although you're in a closed book environment, the way that we're asking students the questions is a little bit more dynamic where possible. It does depend on your subject type, and also relied heavily on academic integrity of the students. So they have to sort of tick a box, if you like, to say that they are going to honour that, and that's what they've signed with us as Imperial students.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question from Jamie about, did the rest of the university also use WiseFlow, or was it contained to your faculty?
Well, we had already started with WiseFlow, and so we were going to be doing a pilot. So the short answer is, for the most part, we were more wholesale, and there were a few other departments that were already looking at as WiseFlow as a product. However, I know that they used a combination of existing tools, so Moodle for some that were appropriate, Blackboard, for example, and other bespoke VLE systems that they could use to assess their students. But there were a few that did use WiseFlow for MCQ questions in particular.
Okay, can I ask a question about, I suppose it's about digital poverty in a way, really. If students were bringing their own devices, were there any issues about some students not being able to, you know, have the kind of equipment they needed, or were they able to borrow? How did you overcome that?
That's another very interesting question. So for us at the business school, we're quite heavily postgraduate heavy. And we're completely paper-based, online anyway. So we don't print any materials, for example. So the expectations for them is slightly different. But that's not to say that the students didn't have difficulties. If some of them had to go back home and had limited screen size, for example, in their equipment. So what would have been okay for your lectures and your work wouldn't necessarily lend itself well to an examine piece of work, so you can see things on screen. But that is a consideration that we're looking at for the next academic year, to make sure that when we're on campus that they've got access to loan equipment, ahead of them doing their exams, and we have that assessment, but we set that expectation in their admissions also.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in addition to that, the WiseFlow software is designed so that it should work with almost anything. In terms of what it requires to download or to use it online. I don't think we've had many that couldn't do it.
Okay, thank you. That's great. We've got a question from John. Did you use any remote proctoring, specifically artificial intelligence-based proctoring?
No. So we had our invigilation. So one of the things that WiseFlow offers is called a flow monitor. So you can monitor, particularly with the way that we were running the exams, you can monitor student progress through the exam. So you can see, have they logged in? Have they done any work? Has their IP address changed? Although we can't really tell that much from that. But then there's also a log of activity as you go through that you can, if you think the students may be struggling or gone and disappeared, you can have a look at that log and see, at this time they did this time they did that. And if a student wasn't progressing through, or something looked a bit suspicious, that's when we would try and get in touch with them and just sort of be like, is everything okay? You haven't done anything for a while.
Thank you. I think we've got one last question from Nada, and it's about, do you use question banks? How do they change with the transition to online exams?
No, we don't use question banks. So like Peter was saying, actually, the importance of writing unique questions is ever more necessary, if you like, in the digital world. I will say that does pose a challenge, though, for faculty. So this is where we're looking at all of our stakeholders. The transition has been one for everybody. So it's time pressure again. They're delivering, in our case, multimodal or purely online lectures, as well as coming up with a bigger pool of questions in a very small space of time. So the ideal is to have a continuous fresh sort of selection of questions. So we don't ourselves, but we do know that other departments do have a similar question bank kind of approach.
Thank you very much. I think that's absolutely perfect timing. So thank you very much to all our to our presenters. I think that was really, really interesting, really insightful, and lots to think about in connection with that.